Hello from New Zealand. We're close to Christchurch. Richard Miller, Never Not Here. And we've just been talking with Barry Brailsford. So let's just go back at it and see if we can understand some more ancient wisdom.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about another invocation?
Yeah, I think it's good. I'll say karakia to open the way for the old things. Once again, I'll be asking that the light at the core of creation itself comes into our hearts and minds. And it's interesting in the old language that heart and mind are the same word. And so they're one. And also I'll be asking that the light comes into our hearts and minds, and that we can walk with compassion, and that we can walk with the courage to carry our dreams into tomorrow. And I think it's important to dream, to have our dreams, and to bring them into action. So that's what I'm going to ask. Nā te maramatanga ki te nākau o te atua. Kia koha te maramatanga ki te nākau o te tangata. Kia koha te maramatanga ki te ao. Mā te maramatanga, mā te aroha, mā te kaha e whākau te whakara nui te ao, te muriora. Hai.
That's an amazing invocation, because for a Western man, somehow we think we're the ones that are able to dream the future with our plans and our endless focus on tomorrow and our total preoccupation with fixing something and getting ready. But yet, as you translated this invocation, you said, let us have the courage to walk our dreams. That shows that humans had a vision thousands of years ago.
Yeah. That brings us to a very important thing in my understanding of where we are. I remember a long time ago, the elder said to me, if we lose our story, we lose our dream. And if we lose our dream, the spirit dies. And today I think a lot of people have lost their story, and they have come to that place where they no longer dream. By dream I mean have a vision of where they want to go. And I think the spirit dies, and it saddens me, because I think there are young people in this world today who feel they have no story. I look at them and I speak with them, and in a sense I can see that they feel they are in this place, they're in this world but not of it. And there's a huge difference between being in a place and of it. And that it's that lack of connection, that lack of involvement, of feeling involved and valued and connected, that's missing for many of them. And you can't really fill that with celebrities and all this.
In a way, no. You could say like there's a lack of connection, and that is an obvious extension of this. But then there's also a lack of conviction. Now you might just say, well, conviction comes out of connection. But conviction is our prerogative, actually, because perhaps our story was to be a private, proud, strong people. And now what we said last hour was that people of good heart and people of peace need to come together and stand out and not be private anymore. And so maybe, can we create a story today from what's appropriate for today by being here and seeing what is now? And how can we carry a story of an active and proactive people, let's say, and also make it germane to this moment? Is that a challenge?
It is a challenge, yes, because we need a story, and I think we need a new story for humankind, but I think the new story, there are elements of the old story that's been lost that can be part of the new story. And if we're looking for some kind of guide from the past, from the old wisdom that's been held sacred and held close for so long by the indigenous peoples and others, if we look into that, we can't transplant that into today. It has to be adapted and changed and used in a way that really works today. So, yeah, we need to create a story. Yeah, but I think we can base that story in part on the old story, which has largely been lost.
A new story and a new mythology.
Yeah.
Right? Because the mythology is somehow the way we see the world and the way we see our value system.
Mm.
And something about our values say that parts of our values say that we're separate and we need to somehow win something or claim our heritage. From who? From someone else, right? I mean, I think I have a lot to say about that in a minute, but I just want to stay on another line for now. But I am saying that that's the cry, really, is maybe we need to understand our story in order to create a new, the question is, why do our grandparents and our elders and our forebears know more than we do? And it seems that way because, none of us are really creative in these generations. I mean, we're just kind of like followers. Even the leaders, they're kind of always looking back over the shoulder and going where the mob goes, right? But they never take a stand that they think that the mob's not going to follow. The political leaders, the dictators even.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
Are the older generations, we're saying they're more in touch. Something about who wrote the Bible, or who wrote the Quran, or who wrote the Vedas. Somehow we're saying those were experiential people and we're just mental people, or what are we saying? Or they say the Kali Yuga, another age, or...
Mm.
Where's the story of 2012 in our hearts?
Yeah, it's still in the making, isn't it? And what do we call upon to write it? And are we so lost that we can't, in fact, create a vision, the new story for tomorrow? Mm. Personally, I believe that we have all that we need to make the story for tomorrow and start walking it today. I believe that's possible. I think we've got to pause and have a look at where we are.
You mentioned the key words, right? The key words evoke the truths.
Mm.
The truths of the past or the truths of the future.
Yeah. The universal truths that are found amongst so many peoples that have stood the test of time. To come back into those, doesn't mean we turn our back on where we're going. I mean, we've got so much going forward. There's so much going for us, and in new technologies. I mean, we have got magic within our science if we are ready to use it as part of a new story. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. So then our conversations a lot have to do with these, let's call it Eastern philosophy, or somehow Eastern spirituality. And so then one of the key figures in something called non-dualism or Advaita is Ramana Maharshi from Tamil Nadu. And of course there is a language, a southern Indian language called Tamil. And all his writings or speakings were translated from Tamil. And lately I heard that new people have looked at that and said, well, that's translated wrong. You know, that's not really what he said, the way we take it in English. And I hung around the ashram for a while, and I talked to different people that were way closer to it than me. And I did interview the guy that ran it for a while. Now his brother runs it, Ganeshan. And he didn't confess any of this stuff, but anyhow. So I heard that they said, well, okay, well, Raman is alive. And the writings are out there, and we're not changing nothing, you know. And when people get up to that level, they'll, you know, Raman, the spirit of Raman is alive, or Raman is here to intercede, and he will tell the teachings to those that are ready for it. Okay, that's like one thing. Another thing is I read that, of course, Buddha spoken in a different language. It was really probably not written very much. I forgot what it was. It starts with an M. I don't remember that language, the name of it. And then even in Sanskrit wasn't written what Buddhist teachings, right? And then, so most Buddhist teachings that we have now come out of China, when the different Buddhist disciples moved to China, and then things grew around them, and then things were written. And then it's just kind of like logical that you can look at the Chinese language and there's very few nouns. And English is all nouns, really. There's a noun for everything. So everything is objectified in English. Everything is an object and a thing, and it's outside of you. And that's the way English people look at the whole world, English-speaking people. And Chinese people, everything is a verb. It's just a doing, like I'm doing Richard Miller now, and then I stop doing Richard Miller, and there's a space here. A space of perception, or a space, something like that, anyhow. So then, here you are giving us a beautiful invocation and talking about the songs, so many songs from the Waitaha people and from the Maori people. And I think it's clear that you have a command of that language. And, or more than one language, maybe there's many languages there. And, but how do you get it into English in a way that, I mean, you get it in a way that you understand it, but English, I think, is a very poor language for many understandings, or a very slanted language. And what kind of a challenge was that?
Well, it was huge because, of course, my role was to be a bridge between the old and today, and between, as you say, a whole other culture and today, and that's been my journey, really, is to bring it from that world into this world, and do it in a way that makes a connection that really matters. And I think the key to doing that is to somehow go beyond the head and touch into the heart, and to make that connection, I believe you do it through stories. And I remember when Chris and I went, and I was invited to speak at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and then later on do the Scientific and Medical Network, and they're an organization that looks at the interface of spirit and science, and it was their conference, and people were giving lectures through over 3 days, and I didn't give lectures, and I spoke once, but I told stories, and it was fascinating because I had the hour before the sacrosanct hour. In other words, my talk was to finish at 12. No one was to continue on to 1, and then at 1 o'clock there was lunch. So there was that sacrosanct hour. But when I finished my hour, no one moved, and after a while the chairman said, well, would you like Barry to go on? And yeah, they agreed, they wanted to go on. And he said, well, we'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll start again. So we were going into the sacrosanct hour, and it was fascinating because 7 or 8 people hived off, and I thought, yeah, well, they've got other things to do. But within minutes they came back. They'd just been to the loo, and we started again. And at the end of the second hour, there was a man from India, a doctor from India, and he stood up and said, this is how I learned. This is how information became real in my village. This is the most important teaching I ever had in my life, was there in the village. And someone else got up and said, when we hear a lecture, we get information. But when we hear a story, we make connection. And that's very different. Because somehow it not only touches the mind, but it also goes to the heart. It involves people in a much more complete way. And that's how I've approached the sharing of the old knowledge. It's by telling stories. And even when I'm asked the question after I've given a talk, I usually answer the question with a story.
So you're speaking parables?
All the time, yeah. And it's a very involving process. People are pulled into it, and it's because of connection. I remember I gave a series of talks in Christchurch, and this university lecturer, who was a mathematician, he'd come and heard me speak 3 times. And eventually I was sitting down in the sun outside after I'd given a talk, and he came up to me and he said, I don't know why I keep coming to your talks. He said, a lot of it I don't understand. He said, but something happens every time and I come back again. And he said, you're bypassing something and touching me somewhere else. He said, it's got nothing to do with my mind. And that, I believe, is just how it works. And it's not something I thought through. It was just the way I was taught by the elders, and it became part of the whole process. And I'd never analysed it until I began to realise that other people were giving me the clues as to what actually happens. Yeah. And I suppose at the beginning, after I was given the knowledge and I started giving talks, there were times when people were so locked into what I was saying that you could hear a pin drop, and it frightened me in a way. You know, I was thinking, who am I to capture these people and hold them in that space? It really frightened me. It was strange. And eventually I went to the elders and I said, I don't know why people listen the way they do. It's upsetting. And the elder said to me, they listen because you speak with the voice of the child. You go beyond the head and straight to the heart. You speak with the voice of the child. And there's something in that too. It's I haven't analysed it deeply, but it's a different kind of connection. And I think that really matters in order to bring this wisdom into today. It's got to be away from the rah, 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 and hype, hype, and, that kind of promotional stuff that is hitting us all the time on the radios and the commercials and television and the commercials. It's coming from another space, and it has to if it's going to work. Yeah. And I think that saying saying the karakia, the prayer at the beginning, is part of moving into that space that embraces everyone. I believe that's part of it too, that we are moving together into something that's really important to everyone, that there is a dimension, a spiritual dimension, a dimension that is of a higher mind, a different space that in a way transcends space and time. It's kind of the eternal. I mean, the elders have taught me that if you're going to do something, you must only do one thing at once. One take, they call it, one thing at a time. Hold the mana of that. That was very important. Just holding that space and doing it once and forever. And when you go into that space and you know that you're honouring everything you're doing in terms of the mana, then it feels like it's done once and forever. It's complete. And as they said, well, then it's of the eternal. It's done once and forever. So it reminds me that, their teachings were all about how things were done. It's the how of things that's so important, not just the getting it done. It's the how things are done that truly matters. And I know I've written again and again that, the journey is the destination. We're so filled with the destination complex that we have to complete the task and get it done within a deadline and make sure it's profitable and all of that kind of stuff, that we forget that there's far more to it than that it's the how things are done that truly matters. And when you move in that space, the how of things, you open the way for all kinds of lovely things to happen. And if you're focusing on the fact that the journey is the destination, that matters, that is truly the key to how you're moving. It shifts a lot of things into a totally different space. Done once and forever.
As I understand your roots, you're a historian. So then a historian often is looking at what was done. And then when you look at what was done, of course, it's colored heavily by your interpretation of what was done. And your interpretation of what the reasoning was and, why that was the limited, why that was the only window they had of opportunity or of perception and so on. But it seems like if you investigate how things are done, maybe once you get the knack of it, you don't need an interpretation. You can just continue that journey. And was that, as a historian, is that how did you develop out of what was done and went to how is this life lived?
Yeah, I think what happened on my journey is that I often wonder why they asked me, someone who was brought up in the Western tradition of education and scholarship, to bring their worldview and their law, their sacred law into the world and their history as it is. I've often wondered about that, and I see now that that upbringing was important, that Western upbringing, that I can't change who I am, but I can honour it, and yet I have to be open to a whole other world. And I also saw that that I had advantages if they'd asked one of their own scholars to do this. There would be all kinds of cultural hooks, if you will, that could make life very, very difficult for them, just because of their Maoriness, their Polynesian roots.
In their own culture or in the other culture that they're delivering the message to?
In both. In their own culture, because of envy and jealousy, that one of their own has been elevated to walk with this ancient law. A huge realm of jealousy can be created. And it was hard enough for me, really, without...
Yeah, you're facing the same thing, aren't you?
Yeah, but in a different way, because, you know, if I was under attack, if you will, to use that word, from the Maori world, I could stand strongly on my Western leg, on my discipline of history and what I'd learnt in archaeology and that worldview. So, you know, that was helpful there. But on the other hand, if I was being put under huge scrutiny and being pushed by my archaeological colleagues, I had that other leg that I've been offered and grounded in now in terms of the ancient law, the sacred law, and all of that, which was, you know, had its own power. So I could move from leg to leg. I had balance, and yeah, sure. I mean, it was difficult from both directions, but there was always enough to help me through. Yeah.
I didn't really ask about Kushla, but perhaps there are mixed couples that would be good deliverers, that would be one part Maori and one part Western.
I don't know. It's hypothetical because it
hasn't happened.
Hasn't been that way.
Hasn't happened.
No.
Yeah.
No. So it's no. I think it's really important in this work. I mean, the elders said this. You can't walk this as a man alone. That's not possible. The old Waitaha way was always that you had to walk in the balance of a man and a woman. And whenever you walked into the tapu places, it was always a man and a woman walked together. So that was the old way, the Waitaha way. I mean, to take a very clear example, for instance, very practical thing, to make fire, which was so essential for life, it was an act of creation, you know, out of two bits of wood, one soft and one hard. You actually were going to bring fire out of the wood, but you're going to go into a space where you brought forth a smouldering bundle of twine that was introduced to the place where the wood was starting to smoulder and come towards fire, and then you wrap that in a little kete or basket with a cord, and then you put it into the realm of the god of winds, Tawhiri Matea, and wound it round through the air with a stone in it to give it force. And it was that rushing of air that brought forth the flame. So that was an act of creation that took you into the realm of tane, of the wood, and into the realm of kohatu, the stone, and into the realm of the wind. And out of it you were bringing fire. So you needed a man and a woman to perform that act of creation. And that was a very tapu place to be. So they brought this balance into everything, you know. Even on the waka, you know, an equal number of men and women at the blades, at the paddles. Walking the Pounamu trails, carrying the jade, the green stone, the thing we call Pounamu, across the mountains, the sacred trail of the stone. Again, there were always women. In fact, that particular trail, the mana of that, the essence, the spiritual essence of that trail, was held by women, because they're the keepers of the stone. Because, you know, the women carry the seed of continuance that's passed on. It's the line of the generations. And, you know, when we go to stone, as I said earlier, we go back to the first ancestor of humankind, because stone held the building blocks of life. So it's, you know, it's an interesting thing, and that balance of men and women, that was everything in the time of Waitaha, absolutely. And one of their greatest navigators was a woman. So women had their place. They could attain any role. No doors were shut. There's all of the balance.
I think that's very misunderstood, you know, especially maybe we can only understand our own mindset as a Westerner, when I think of native cultures, I think of male domination and warrior class and so on and so on, Although now, when you say the seed of continuance, I've heard that too, that tribal rights are passed by the mother. And then we had a discussion with the Cherokee some months ago, and he was saying that, I was surprised, he was saying that the actual ideal, the Cherokee ideal, is androgyny. It doesn't have sex, it's both. Or that's where things are going to, in their consideration of growth of consciousness. It's beyond gender, or before gender, let's say. So then, I think that's really misunderstood.
Well, I don't have any comment on that, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think...
I guess I'm expressing my surprise.
Yeah. Well, I think this whole male dominance thing has got a history. It's a history that comes out of the shift from society that lived in peace to one where warrior values became totally dominant. And that's been a tragedy, really, of humankind for thousands and thousands of years. But if we look at the Polynesian world, we know from archaeological work that the Pacific world of Polynesia experienced 2,500 years of peace. And that peace wasn't broken until some 700 or 800 years ago. And that there was such a unity amongst the tribes, and such a connection unto homelands, beyond homelands, and such an honouring of ancestors, and such a whole network of intermarriage and, binding relationship that went back so far in time that you have a huge family in the Pacific.
Are these like myths of Lemuria or something like this, or like some ocean continent that had glorious golden ages?
Well, you could see it like that. I think that if there was a continent of Mu, there were good candidates for that, but they actually predate the Polynesians. That's of the time before the Great Ice Age, and well, it's part of that whole paradigm for the time of the Great Ice Age, which happened 1,000 years ago. But what the Ice Age did was actually create two huge continents. It, the moisture of the ocean, the clouds, got into a dynamic where they kept recycling the water that was gathered up in the heat of the tropics and dropping it as snow and hail and whatever, on the poles. And as that dynamic kept moving, you eventually get to the point where the ocean, the level of the ocean sinks by 350 feet. And we know this. It's totally proven now. And, so there's a huge landmass exposed that embraced Malaysia right through Borneo down into Indonesia. All of those island groups were one continent called Sundaland. And Australia extended out and embraced New Guinea and all kinds of islands there. And there was just a narrow strip of land between the two continents. And that was called Sahul. So you had two continents, and a lot of flat land. And Sundaland was twice the size of India. And this has all been mapped out and verified by, the maritime scientists and whatever. But then when the great melt came, in 3 huge floods spread over 3 pulses of melting, spread over about 15,000 years, and there are 3 of them. And some cultures have the stories of the 3 floods. In fact, one of the North American Indian tribes still retains the story of 3 floods. And in writings in India, in some of the ancient scripts, they have the Great Flood, and they even have the guy who made the big ship to save everyone. I mean, it's a Noah story, but in another continent. And when the oceans came up, those 2 continents were drowned. And that was a long time of wonderful revelation of productive soils and I would think a life of abundance for many people. So that would be a golden age. And then they were drowned. When the ocean came up again 350 feet, you get what you've got today. What were the hills are now little islands, thousands of them. It's a whole change. It's a dramatic change, and those changes came about quite quickly. And I believe probably millions of people died. That it was a shattering time for those peoples. Died not just because of rising waters, but because all the food resources were gone. So there was a period which you could call a golden age, and sure, you could call Sunderland Mu. You could have Lemuria sitting in there. That would be quite fine. Yeah. So those things have a place in terms of the Earth history. But I don't go there. It's not. Yeah. I've not been taught in that realm.
Right.
But I do bring those understandings to, in fact, where the Polynesians came from, because they were one of the few peoples, I believe, who had the maritime skills to be able to take advantage of that change. And actually, the ocean, they'd always had this amazing relationship to the ocean, and the rising ocean was no problem to them. They became the greatest navigators, sailors the world's ever seen.
Oh. Just a dumb question from a northerner. I suppose New Zealand and Australia had ice ages.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the South Island.
There's probably moraines and glacial remains and boulder remains and everything.
Yeah, over much of the South Island. The ocean was frozen from the South Island right down to Antarctica. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I would think Tasmania too.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Yeah, and the evidence is there in the landscape.
Yeah.
Go to Arthur's Pass, you'll be driving under the glaciers of old.
Right.
They were back there 10,000 years. That's when it started to retreat. And these are events that are large in many cultures. They're something like 650 different peoples, different cultures have the story of the Great Flood, or floods. Yeah. It's a massive event in the history of humankind. Yeah. And it's there in the Bible, as well as in other writings. Yeah.
So when you look at a human, it's pretty clear that, some people say we're stardust, but just to stay on planet Earth, we're Earth. Definitely born out of the Earth. Definitely we eat the Earth and are sustained by the Earth. We return to the Earth.
Yeah.
And then early mankind just lived on the Earth in some kind of abundance with enough space where really there was no reason to fence it off or corral it or ever think that it was a limited resource and that we have to get some more of it. And then, so they maintained their connection with Earth. So they know Earth, right? Because when I was in Australia, I was listening to them chant, "Always was, always will be Aboriginal land." And of course I didn't know what the heck that meant, because us white populations think it means that they want to charge us rent or something like that. It means that they own it now and they're gonna, I don't know what. But I came to find out, or came to think, that that's not what it meant at all. And then somehow that populations had moved into scarcer places, probably north and south, farther away from the equatorial zones. Things weren't always abundant, and some people were stronger than others, and that's where wars and aggression kind of developed. And then what happened was those pale people were de-landed by some other pale people, right? I mean, that's the story of our pioneers up there, that these were, there's the nobles and the peasants, right? And so then certain groups of people, the peasant class, had no longer a connection with land, and they couldn't really be land and honor land and steward land, because, they weren't allowed to hunt the deer, they weren't allowed to cut the trees, they weren't allowed, at the penalty of death or whatever. All they could do was scratch around on the ground and give most of what grows to the nobleman, right? And so then somehow our connection to land was broken, and that's why we moved. We moved, we dreamed of land, but still we didn't know what it was. Not because the Aborigines say, 40,000 years or something like that. How many generations is that? I mean, hundreds of generations unbroken on this land. Don't take it away from me. This is sacred. What sacred means, I mean. And a white person can't really have that. A colonial person can't really know that. And a colonial person probably can never reclaim that. At first I used to think of myself as free from land, and I was a man of the sky, a man of the air, a man of the earth, a flyer. I was the eagle. But I mean, when I started to understand more original people, then I understood that we never can be really stewards, because we don't get it, right? What's our salvation, or is there one? Or can we listen to these original people and really get it, and really start to, or are we just lost as far as honoring planet Earth and having our mana developed? We've lost our mana.
Yeah, we can lose it in one generation, and that's been happening. And unfortunately, it's also been happening to indigenous peoples. I mean, that so much can be taken away in one generation if they aren't walking in the way of the land, and they become isolated in cities and
and welfare systems.
Yeah, and all that kind of thing. And then, of course, there's the descent into drugs and alcohol, and all those terrible things that simply become their lot, things that are virtually beyond their control, because they lose all sense of who they are. They've lost their story, which is where I started quite a while ago. They lose their story and therefore no longer dream, and the spirit dies. But it can also come back in a generation, I believe. I believe that that within the blood itself, within the DNA,
Yeah.
it's
Well, we said nothing is lost, right? We said nothing
Yeah.
is lost, right?
No.
And it can be sung back in somehow or something. I don't know.
Exactly.
What did we say?
Yeah, it can be sung back in. Yeah, it's been forgotten. We just have to awaken to the fact that it exists, and it can be embraced again, and we can go into that awareness. People ask me, what is wisdom? And I say, well, I don't know, maybe it's just increasing awareness, and constantly increasing awareness. And Waitaha had a term for this. They called it te waiponamu, which means the journey, the stream of consciousness, the stream, the waters, if you will, of ultimate awareness. That would be their definition of enlightenment, I suppose, if we were coming to that kind of term. But it's being open to that awareness. And, I often say to people, you can't claim the land, because the land actually claims you every day. It's the land that claims you if you allow it. And if you think about it, you know, the vegetables we eat are from the land itself, and it's the product of those soils, and we take those vegetables in, and the calcium becomes part of our bones, and you know, and the different minerals and things become part of our flesh and our blood, and every time we drink from the rivers, from the rains or whatever, that is also of our blood. And every time we take a breath, we're accepting the gift of the trees. So our very breath is offered from the land around us, the environment. So it's claiming us moment by moment and hour by hour. So we belong. We are part of all this, and it's when we get that awareness and open up to all of this that we can walk this in another way. We can occupy this space in another way, and we can become comfortable with what is around us, and be part of it, be of it, not just in it. It's being of things that matters. Finding ourselves again, being of things, and just being open, because it's being offered all the time.
That's truly a message of hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
Hope
because
is
it's clear when you say that we're of the land. I mean, every breath and every, it's a gift of the trees, and every the water seems like more of a no-brainer if we don't mess it up too much, because it just keeps recycling by itself. But the land, I think we have to be stewards of the fertility and not really just deplete it like we're doing with the chemicals and pump it so hard,
It goes for everything. I mean, we have to be careful to keep the air pure. We have to look after the trees and the grasses and the flowers, because they are giving us air. They give us oxygen, we breathe. We have to be careful with the waters and be stewards of the waters. There's a stewardship there that's essential, and we have to look after the earth and not turn it into deserts where, we over-irrigate to the point where all we're doing is salting the earth and destroying it.
Using up
how we go.
Ancient waters too, lowering the ancient water tables that are not being replaced. That's clear all over the world.
And we have to be careful with how we try to exploit the oils within the earth. I mean, here we are in Canterbury, New Zealand, and we're getting really upset about the fact that the big companies are coming in and they want to start fracking. And we have the most amazing aquifer systems under Canterbury. I mean, they're incredible. And I know that some 30 years ago, research was done by our water scientists that shows that rain that falls in our mountains on the Great Divide up Arthur's Pass and whatever, only 60, 70 kilometres away, that rain, when it goes down into the earth, a lot of that goes so deep into our wonderful aquifers that it takes 100 years for it to reach Christchurch. Now, when you think about that, in fact, I know again from the scientists that water that's down in those aquifers has no strontium-90 in it, because it went in there before nuclear testing. And when Chernobyl happens, I know the scientist who had to do the testing for over 400 countries who sent samples to New Zealand, and they were testing against our pure waters to measure the strontium-90 that was in their waters. We were the gold standard against which they measured the waters of the planet. It was all done here. So imagine what's happening or could happen if you start this fracking business and put all these chemicals, these toxic chemicals into that strata and penetrate these aquifers and fill them with toxins. Imagine it taking 100 years to flush that out, because that's what you're up against. you just destroy the most pristine reservoirs of water that are on the planet. We can't have that. It's absolutely crazy to do that in the interest of increased wealth, which is such a temporary thing. We've got to get this right.
Yeah, it's not even the people's wealth, it's just a perceived wealth that maybe somebody has, but that just brings us to kind of like what we were talking about last session, that it's time for all good people to stand up and be counted in some way, right? Mm-hmm. And we've heard before on our discussions that it seems like the vast majority of people are complacent or in a panic, but nothing in between, There's no well thought out action plan or there's no engagement. We have a belief that we're overused already, overbooked, and then that's called complacency. And we're not really for someone to make more money out of oil, or they'll just say, bring us some more cheap Chinese products or something, I don't know what. Let our dollar go farther, or I don't know. Mm. But not really thinking about what's left in this, how are things soiled here? The bedroom is soiled, and this is this is what we're giving to our children and grandchildren. And let the maid clean it up, That's too much for me.
Yeah, well, I like to go back. I mean, I look for the hope in all of this. I like to go back to Grandfather Titus, the old one who was 112, who said, there are enough one-hearted people, and it's, I do meet so many people who are becoming more aware of the needs and committing themselves more and more to making a difference. And, as Gandhi said, be the difference you want to see. Be the difference you want to see. And it's in each of us to do that, and as that happens, then you get this amazing groundswell. It comes down to the individual. It comes down to us making a commitment to reflecting on where we are, to really looking at the truth of our own journey, to thinking about the how of things, how they're done, and moving in a good way, in learning once again to honour spirit, the spirit within us, which connects us with everything, holding the mana of everything around us in place, and doing that within ourselves, and then things start to change. I actually have a great belief in the individual being able ultimately to bring about the change. I'm very wary of isms, of movements that start out with great intentions and simply become self-sustaining, self-serving.
But isms aren't real, They're really just total concepts. Isms have no substance, And exactly. Even a collective noun has no substance. A herd, people, they ought to do it. They ought to do this, Exactly. Who's they? They is you and me.
Exactly.
There is no they.
Yeah.
And so they're never going to do it.
No. We're going to have to come back to you and me. We're going to have to come back to, people come to me and young people and say, how do we save the rainforest? How do I save the rainforest? And I say, well, actually, you've got to go away and think about yourself. How do you bring yourself to that space where you're walking the truth of who you are? You've got a journey to make, and in doing that and making that journey and growing more aware and more responsible for who you are, then that's the beginning of the saving of the rainforest. And if everyone's doing that, then we change the whole tenor of the planet, the way humanity moves. it's not impossible. I mean, if you look at it in terms of the great isms and the great corporations and the things that can never be outmaneuvered or whatever, then that's the road into despair. But I think
we have to look at it in two steps, because you could say, okay, we have to look in, and when everybody's doing that, of course we'll be saved. But when is everybody going to do that? Do we have to wait that long? So then really what you have to do is look into yourself and then speak your truth. Because speak your truth is tell everyone you know the good news, right?
Yeah.
And then everyone will be doing it. But until you tell everybody, I don't know, I'm always saying, express yourself.
Yeah, get the word out there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Walk your truth.
Right.
Yeah, walk it. Don't just think it, walk it. Be it.
Mm-hmm.
Be the change you want to see. Be it. And so I think there's huge hope in that, because I do believe that I've seen a lot of change in this country. I've seen a lot of change.
In New Zealand.
And I've seen a lot of change in other places too, but you see two sides of a coin, because you see really positive change. And the more you get the positive change, you can also be seeing a negative reaction. Whenever
the reaction to it, you see the change and the reaction to it.
You do, yeah, and I mean that happened in South Africa. You look at apartheid, and we stood against apartheid really strongly here in New Zealand, and you probably don't know this, but the whole world in South Africa was around rugby. That was the game, and then when in '81, when they brought their team here to play tests against New Zealand, those who were against it, they actually tore down the fences and invaded the football field and stopped the first game. And that was news that went round the world. And that divided families, everyone was split down the middle around for or against the tour. And, there were people who put their lives on the line to stop it. But the effects of that were absolutely staggering in South Africa. Absolutely staggering. And since then, South Africans have come out and spoken about how it was huge. It actually shifted the whole perception of where they stood in the world and what had to happen. It's been fascinating, because there have been programs done about this, and members of that South African team and their families and others have been interviewed more recently and said, how did this affect you? They said, it changed their lives. We look back and we see that what this country did, that news that went around the world, and how people in another land stood up to fight for us. Yeah. So, change comes, and it comes from that, for walking the truth of it as you see it. It does happen. Yeah.
We actually visited Castle Hill last week.
Mm-hmm.
And so we saw some amazing mountains and rock formations, and we felt the kind of like flights of fancy, let's say, that when we saw these rocks and so on, we could say we felt energy, or we somehow we had thoughts or something. In our other conversations we've talked about, maybe off camera, about power spots on the earth, and song lines and ley lines and intersections and so on, and energy. And sometimes we try to figure out, well, how does it work? Like there's more metal or something in one mountain than another metal, and then there's ore deposits, there's fractures where energy can move along fractures, or Earth is holy, right? And why is one Earth more holy than another? Why is one mountain more holy than another? And I used to often think, I told you about Ramana, Ramana Maharshi in Tiruvannamalai is where he lived, and his ashram is, and there's mountain there called Arunachala. It's a holy mountain. And people walk around it. It's an 8-kilometer walk. And you walk clockwise, and it's called Pradakshina. Pradakshina must be a Tamil term. And but okay, Ramana died in the 50s, or 1950 actually. But that mountain, for thousands of years, it's been a Shiva mountain. That's a Shivite town, and that's the main Shivite temple. That's the temple of fire for southern India. There's a temple for water, for fire, for earth and air, and for space, and that's the fire temple, Tiruvannamalai. And how many millions of people? Now on the festival in December, I think 2 million or 2.5 million people come to Tiruvannamalai and do pradakshina. And the mountain's on fire actually, because they light a pot of ghee up there, and they run it 24/7 for 10 days. And at night it's got that shining eye, the eye of Shiva. And people walk around, and the idea is that your attention is on that eye for the whole walk. It doesn't waver. It's kind of a meditation, right? See, so then I'm trying to ask myself, like, is land holy, or does man's consciousness impress a vibration on land, that this land, that mountain's been worshipped for 10,000 years maybe, and so many people went up it, and they went up it 1 foot at a time with their full consciousness on each step, and so then what makes land holy? How does it work? What are these energy spots?
That's a lovely question. Yeah, there are huge currents in the ocean, rivers in the ocean, all right, and these are rivers of huge energy. But there are also rivers of energy in the land, and they are the creation of the earth itself, which is spinning around.
You mean like magma, or above that, or
no, it's not like magma. This is just energy, and it's created by the earth itself spinning around the magma in the center, the core.
Does it have to do with the moon too, and with the moon and sun lining up, and the new moon and the old moon?
No, that's a different kind of energy we could speak about.
It's the tides, of course, but it also pulls on the land.
Yeah, no, this is different energy. This is an earth energy that creates a network around the planet. And, the earth, through its rotation, is creating an energy that protects us from lethal radiation, So there's a magnetic field that goes right out into space. That's really part of our protection. Without that, and without the ozone layer, there'd be no life on Earth. It would be wiped out. So that's all happening. But there is also this energy that runs around the planet, in the Earth itself, and and we call it Earth energy. It's really
maybe simple. It's like a counterbalance, or like it's a reaction, or a reaction to the magnetic forces, and it just it's a reflection of that. Maybe
I believe it's little understood. I believe it's a mystery at the moment to many scientists, to most scientists, but it was definitely understood by our ancestors in the sense that they knew where powerful energy lines crossed. Powerful rivers of energy, if you will, actually crossed each other. And on those places they built temples, the temple of Apollo, the temple of Athena. But then if you come into New Zealand, that's where we find sacred places, the extremely tapu places where they did teachings, because they realized that where those huge energy lines crossed, that it raised your consciousness. It actually helped you learn. It put you into another space, and that was hugely important. So you can go all around the planet and you'll find that the sacred places in Europe are based on the crossing lines of these energy fields, these energy lines. You find that when the church came, the Christian church, they placed their cathedrals and chapels and various other sacred places, places of worship. They placed them on the old pagan altars at those
they
crossings.
could feel it, huh?
Yeah. So they did that.
In a way, that's interesting because, like, you could say that's a static view of the energy, right? Because these are the places of the, or these are the portholes into the stream, But maybe consciousness travels on those energy lines, and maybe that was dream time and the other kind of connection that when similar things between the different original peoples, there are similar stories or similar myths, and there's similar knowledges. And maybe that all traveled on those lines, or we don't know. But is there any kind of like myth like that?
No, not that I know of, although it's a lovely thing to think about. But what I do know is that, in endless cultures of the old cultures, there was an understanding of the power of these places and the use of them, raising standing stones there, holding wānanga there, wherever, as places of learning and places of heightened consciousness. But see, what we've found in more recent times is that with dowsing rods, we can actually find these places. Our ancestors didn't need dowsing rods. They just walked into them. They felt them.
Their feet were dowsing rods.
Yeah, bare feet. and that, they really understood these places. And when I go to the Waitaha sacred places through New Zealand, we find the crossing lines. We find that the powerful energy points gather there. So, they're very real. And what we do find, though, and this is something that's been, I think, developed more recently to give us a deeper understanding of probably what our ancestors understood very well indeed, is that we can find an energy spot, and we can nowadays, with a dowsing rod, we can actually measure its power, because out of that crossing point radiate energy lines that are like the spokes of a wheel, bicycle wheel.
Right.
Yeah, and we can walk around one of those and ask the dowsing rod to show us each spoke.
So will they show us the direction of it, or do they just show it exists?
Just show us it exists. That's all we need at the moment, to know that they exist. So we count them around that energy line, and the first time we've come to that, we might find that energy line has a count of 20 of these spokes going out. But then, if you gather a group of people, and we've done this many times, you gather a group of people and you ask them just to stand around and acknowledge its presence. In other words, put our consciousness there. And you don't have to say a word. You can just look at it and you can mentally say, hello. Yeah, great to meet you. Whatever you wish. Just acknowledge its presence. And then you go around again and measure the number of lines. And it could have doubled, maybe trebled. And if you're into this, you'll find that you can't fake these things. I've done quite a lot of this with a friend, and you can, you can bring someone in blindfold who hasn't seen what's happened or anything, and are not there for the initial count, and you can bring them in and put them there and say, go around and tell us how many lines there are, and their count will be much higher than the first one. So the more we consciously engage with that, the more we power it up. And it's truly amazing. I mean, it just blows you away when you start realizing that our consciousness somehow interacts with that consciousness. It really shakes people up to realize that we can have that connection. It's quite incredible. If you've never done any dowsing, it's I've had people. I've trained hundreds of people to dowse, and for a few years there were American students came out here, about 25 for some weeks, and to spend time with with Kushla and I up at Castle Hill, and each time they came, I would run them through lots of things, but I'd always take them through a session of learning how to dowse. And I remember one young man came and he said to me, "I've heard about this. My friend told me about this." He said, "And I don't believe a word of it." He said, "I just want to tell you that now. I simply don't believe it." And I said, I'm going to do what you ask, but don't expect anything of me." He said, "Being straight up, because my friend told me," and he said, "As far as I'm concerned, it was just a bunch of rubbish." And I said, "Well, that's great, just do what you like, but, you're welcome." Well, we went into it, and it's amazing, It only takes about 10 minutes to teach people to dowse. And they're jumping up and down with excitement. And this guy didn't come anywhere near me until about an hour, and I was teaching them to do a lot of different things with dowsing. I mean, I could stand you up over there, and I could ask to see the aura of your heart, and see how far your heart energy comes out, and I could map that. I could walk around you, and then I could, I could ask you to do something, and then I could measure it again, or I could take you to a tree and find its aura. Everything has. It's like it's mana. Everything has something that's there. I can't explain it, but it's there. And you can go to a tree, for instance, and as you approach it, say, where is your aura? And the rod will flick, and then you walk to the tree, you put your back to it and just be there for a time. And then you walk out again and ask where its aura is. It'll be twice as wide as when you came in. There's a shift, there's a consciousness happens that's really very exciting. It bowls people over when they do this. And so it has a huge power. And our ancestors used to use this to find water, which is essential for life, to find coal, to find tin, to find copper. And now there are big corporations around the world who employ people to find power lines they've lost plans to, or sewer lines they've lost plans to, or whatever. People employed to do this, and it's accurate, it's right. It's an amazing link of consciousness. It's a dimension beyond us that we don't use, and our ancestors used it all the time. So that's a very important thing to get into, and it certainly gives you a stretch. And this young American, he came to me after the hour and said, "I really have to apologize." He says, "This has blown me over.
Wow.
I just can't believe what's happening here." He said, "It's absolutely, I'm going to have to go and think again around my science." Yeah.
One thing is to find power lines and sewer lines and so on, but it's quite a different thing to say that you can perceive a certain amount of energy lines, and then you can think about it or focus on it, and then there are more. And so basically it sounds like the power of prayer. And then this is something that really we could be also doing besides standing up and speaking our truth. We could also be focusing our consciousness. Many people talk of that and say that does something, but they don't really say how.
But it does.
Yeah.
There've been enough experiments done now to show that it can work. That focus of consciousness of the many on something can work. Yeah, it's quite amazing. Yeah.
See, there's no end to fascination here. I think we can really go a long way, and so much of it is based on what the ancients knew and what we can find in this knowledge that you've shared and been shared, that's been shared to you.
Sure.
And
and it's fun, the elders always said to me, "You have to learn to carry the heavy things lightly, to dance the trails of life." Yeah. and that's lovely. Oh, actually, I was always a dancer when I was so high.
Yeah.
And sometimes it has got heavy, but it's it's the fun in it, it's the joy of it, it's excitement.
Well, somehow carrying lightly is just an open-heartedness, right? And what they're saying is like whatever you're doing is more effective with the open-heartedness. So then even the heavier things get, the lighter you have to handle them.
Yeah.
And stay open and be effective. Effective at what? Effective at supporting our fellow man.
Exactly.
Effective at supporting our planet.
And trusting that, there is a future and we can be the change that we want to see. Yeah. And that there are enough one-hearted people, to do the job.
I totally thank you, Barry. Fabulous.
Hey.
Barry Brailsford. Thank you, everybody, for watching us. I don't know, I hope we can see Barry again. Maybe we'll get up to Castle Hill and do some dowsing, but maybe not, I will see. So, we're going to put all the links up to these books and you can look into it. I'm not going to try to suggest one right now, or should I? I don't know.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll see what you can see, and then we'll send you out some. Very well, that is. So, thanks again for a really wonderful afternoon and wonderful morning, too.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Wonderful. Yeah, great. Nice to share these things.